Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Neil Golson, EVP Marketing and Strategic Partnerships of Flash Parking. Welcome to the podcast, Neil.
Thanks so much.
Super excited to have you here. Everybody's talking about parking, but nobody truly understands parking. You're a parking expert. We're going to dive into this and have a fun conversation. But before we dive into this, I'd love to know, what is the current state of the parking business?
It's coming back. I think the recovery just keeps getting faster every day. I mean, we see our dailies in terms of who's entering the garages that we manage and also the online demand and who's booking online. And it's amazing to see the vaccine rollouts get there and just the difference in a year. So essentially a year ago, we were looking at parking overnight down 90%. And really what we saw was just a really slow, gradual build back to where we are today, which I would say today we're looking at still an industry that's down 65% to where it was pre-COVID. Really across the board, there are a few dynamics that we can dive into in terms of kind of where people are parking and how that's shifting because there is so much availability literally right now, but everything says that's going to change pretty quick in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
I fully agree with you. We can look at publicly available data, such as the TSA data. Passengers are going through airports, they're traveling, and when you start traveling on planes, you're going to have mobility such as cars play a role in that. You mentioned something really interesting about managing garages. Does Flash own the infrastructure?
We don't. We're really the enabler to the asset owners and the asset operators. So the asset owners are potentially individual owned all the way up to Brookfield Properties. That's a real estate investment trust that owns these. And typically they do hire an asset operator, which is a parking operator like Laz Parking or SB Plus or ABM. And there's like 14,000 different parking operators out there. And there are 4 big ones that we work with. But our role is really to enable them and to drive their technology so that they can differentiate their own asset.
Wow. Brookfield's doing a lot in mobility. They have the Northern Virginia where they're partnering with Optimus Ride. They're building these incredible live, work, play experiences. And then are you the really cool parking software that lives on top of their assets, says, hey, we're going to help you monetize this. We're going to help you eliminate friction. And so when your customers come here, they're going to have this frictionless experience, say, wow, the parking wasn't a hassle.
Right. The parking wasn't a hassle. And oh, by the way, this scooter was right next to my space and I'm going to pay for it all when I leave at the end of the day in one transaction. That's really the opportunity that we have in front of us.
Then how do you integrate all the payments? Let's just say I'm visiting a Brookfield property. I park my car, I hop on a scooter and I zoom around the area. Do you do all that back-end payment integration as well?
We do, yeah. So let's think about that journey specifically. So when you decided to make that journey, wherever that was, that might have been, well, at this point, 2 years ago when you bought a concert ticket, but generally, all the way up until, might be your commute, you're sitting on a couch, you might think about parking. You might say, hey, Alexa, I'm going to go downtown and find pizza. Great. Here's your recommendation. Would you like parking? And then you can transact through Alexa before you've left your house. So you say you're going to the Sears Tower, you know that you can get in and out. You may transact in advance. You may be able to actually get downtown and stumble upon that lot. It may be built into your navigation. And so when you go in, we're actually pulling the information that you have from your reservation, or we're pulling from, you might pull a ticket, or we may have you on file from your license plate because you've come in before. And we can attach all of that together then on one parking session. And so then when you leave, we're tying all the different sources and all the different things that you did together, a lot like when you check out of a hotel, right? Your room service is there, your parking's there. All of that is our engine on the backside.
You have an integration with Ticketmaster for using the barcode for concerts. And I used to work in the music business, and concerts are going to come roaring back, and you can see the pent-up demand. People want to go see a great band play a great show. How does that work? So you just take the barcode, you scan it. Is that eventually all going to go digital?
It'll eventually all be digital, and that's really where the convenience comes in. And so you think about, again, you're buying your ticket, that's loading into your calendar. So the ticket itself, when you're entering the venue, is now typically digital. So that same barcode can be recognized by our system to let you in and out of a garage. And what we're actually seeing with one of our biggest entertainment property customers, Olympia Entertainment, that pretty much owns all the sports and entertainment venues in Detroit, they're actually looking to extend that. So not only are you starting at Ticketmaster, but then you're operating out of a digital wallet that might live within the Detroit Red Wings app. And all of that's integrated. So I want the consumer to go with whatever brand or affinity they have to interact with whatever app they have. My role is to link it all on the back end. So if you never know you're transacting with ParkWiz, Flash, Arrive, any of the brands that we know, and you're just going from Ticketmaster to the Fox Theater in Detroit, you want to park, you want to buy some drinks, and then you want to get out of there, all of that can be communicated to us, and I can have one single transaction on the way out for you.
Wow. Let's stay on the Red Wings theme. I'm there, I buy a beer, and I buy an octopus to throw on the ice. That's all seamless transaction.
Yep. So think about just in the same way that today you might take your phone and go when you buy those things and do Apple Pay, you can activate those exact same rails within the Detroit Red Wings, even with that app, even within Apple Pay. So you're choosing whatever platform you want. We're just putting it all together in the backside to say, hey, here's Neil's active record of parking. He's actually already out. We've seen Ticketmaster said he's entered. Keep his tab running, and we'll pull it all together at the end. And so from a Detroit Red Wings standpoint, they want to be able to offer you upsells and packages and bundles if you're a season ticket holder. All of this information is available. We just do it all through the API integrations to provide as much data as we can to the end consumer marketer, in this case, our Detroit Red Wings example. How do they want their fans' experience to be designed? We're just enabling it on the other end to bring all these pieces together so that you could, at the same time you make your Ticketmaster purchase, you make your open table reservation, you make your parking reservation, and then as you're going through your evening, we're just taking all the information from each one of those experiences and queuing it up for an end of night tab settlement.
You're building the future of entertainment because consumers no longer they're tired of taking their wallet out, or somebody like me doesn't carry a wallet. You just carry a phone.
Yep.
And you don't want to keep doing all these transactions. I have to ask you though. So today we're coming out of this COVID fog. Consumer demand is going to go for concerts. They're going to go back to restaurants. Mm-hmm. How are you preparing for that massive load of traffic that's going to be coming on your system?
Great question. So one of the first things for us and what really makes us different and a technology company, not a parking company, is that our foundation, our founders come out of payment services. And so when you think about our processing engine, just currently kind of how scalable is the core product. So all that's running in the cloud on Azure, which is completely different than Microsoft Azure. It's completely different than anything else in the parking space. Every other parking system that you interact with, they've got a room of servers on site. And so all that lives behind a firewall in a little silo. Ours lives within the Azure platform in a single instance, multi-tenant system that's in the cloud that's infinitely scalable. So today we're doing 4,000 transactions a second. We were doing a heck of a lot more than that pre-COVID. We'll see all of that come back and really have no concern from our platform scalability. Now, one of the things that you have to think about is we're an enabler of those parking operators and those asset owners. Those are the labor source to run that garage. They furloughed or let all those folks go. They are rapidly hiring right now just to get back the infrastructure support teams that they need. And so right now we're doing a lot of extra trainings. We're doing a lot of extra recording webinars and enabling the onboarding of all of those employees that are out in these garages that work for our customers. And then we're staffing up on our support side as well. So going forward, we have the ability to monitor all the equipment. So if a gate is stuck because somebody can't get out, that sends an alarm to our customer support system. They're on the phone trying to figure out what's going on. We're also just looking for all of those bottlenecks that occurred before. Great example is if any other people's equipment and our equipment a couple of years ago, and all of our equipment is SaaS, so it's updated whenever we make a change, all of it gets it automatically overnight, just like a Tesla over-the-air update. And right now, we looked at when somebody pulls the last ticket, basically that lane shuts down until somebody else brings another stack of tickets and puts it in. Our software automatically rolls over and says, here's all the ways, slide your credit card in now. We're not charging you, but that's your access system. Would you like us to read your license plate? And you can just read that on your way out. You don't have to pull a ticket. So our system just keeps going and says, oh, that one's not available. Next. So there is no human intervention there. We're doing a lot of the same things on pricing to make sure that, by 10 a.m., if a garage is full, you probably didn't charge enough that morning. So we're trying to send you signals earlier based on your inventory use to say, hey, somebody didn't update the price this morning, guys. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, or it's a rainy day in the neighborhood, so nobody wants to park on street. Your demand's about to go up. Raise your price. And we're making recommendations, and that system and that AI is essentially running on its own. But all of it at the end of the day is dependent on that local operator to make the final decision, or to enable that they have to make the choice to say, just do it. And we have a few customers that are doing that.
We've all been stuck where you're waiting for the thing, and then they have to wait for the person to come. You're like, this is a horrible experience. I'm never coming back here.
Yep.
I used to live in California, and at the Century City Westfield, that used to be a big problem. They put new technology in there with the ALP, and all of a sudden there was 2 hours free parking, and this scan your thing, it's like boop boop,
yep.
And it was like, okay, I like this place. I'm going to go back because I don't have to wait for the tickets to run out, which was a huge, huge issue.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things we see, and our system can change on a dime to say, what is the problem? What is the consumer experience you're solving? We installed pre-COVID in Miami at the American Airlines Arena, as well as the garages across the street. And when the game is actually happening, essentially it's prepaid parking. And then if you're actually parking, you have to prepay upon entry. Our system just switches that at a designated time because everyone leaves the basketball game at the same time. So if you have it the normal way where they pay to go out, you're waiting. So we can literally change the operational structure with a flip of a switch. And now that's a completely different payment structure to solve a specific problem that only occurs 72 times a year at night, right? So they never want to run their operation that way any other time, but the ability to make that switch without someone coming on site, reconfiguring the software, all that's unique to our platform.
For example, with the American Airlines Arena, when you put the flash parking system there, did you have to upgrade all of the hardware, or could you take existing hardware and put it, let's say, just simple, connected to the internet?
Typically, we upgrade the hardware, and a big part of that is most other people's hardware is again, everything's inside it. So, a rat's nest is something that comes to mind when you open the back of somebody else's hardware. And what's interesting is our hardware is really just an IoT device that's about the size of an Apple TV, and everything runs in the cloud. It's just doing whatever on-site computing, edge computing needs to happen to make sure the gate opens really quickly. And then we have the connections, the USB connections to a printer, USB connections to a cash taker. All those are just simple plug and play, low voltage. So most of our box is actually empty because all that occurs in the cloud. So it's just a much simpler operation, and the speed and the throughput and the dynamics and the flexibility all live in the cloud. That's the key differentiator.
What type of feedback are your customers, either in the hotel industry or the sporting industry, getting from fans? Because it's this, after the concert or the sporting, you're like, okay, come on, let's go. And then somebody can't find their wallet, or they only have cash and only takes a credit card. There's all these situations that we've all experienced. It seems that their net promoter scores would go up, their customer satisfaction would go up.
Yep.
Are you seeing that and turn into real world data?
We are. I mean, that's a big thing. We talked about Olympia and Detroit before. I mean, that's one of their biggest pieces of data feedback from season pass holders and those that have priority parking and have those. How's your experience? How does this fit together? How can we make it more convenient? One of the things that we saw, really over the last 5 years, if you look at kind of the folks who need parking and you look at the virtual fleets and the Uber drivers and everything else that I'm sure we'll get into and kind of the what's coming world, all of those are making this whole thing more complicated, and they have a different requirement set. And that's what we're really seeing is customers want digital experiences. Customers don't want to carry cash. More than 50% of 25 to 55-year-olds used a phone tap to pay within the COVID last 12 months. Like, that is staggering. So not the credit card tap to pay, but actually using their phone to tap to pay. That wasn't even available in parking pre-COVID. I mean, so you think about how much this has jumped and what consumer expectations are going to be on the other end. And parking operators have basically had a world where they haven't had something that threatens their ability to raise rates since the fuel shortage in the 1970s. Because every other crisis, housing crises were suburbs problems, right? Not downtown. So you think about the downtown real estate market, it's just gone up. These guys have been able to raise their price and not innovate to the consumer, But with the rise of Uber 5 years ago, that dynamic changed. You had the first real threat to them, and now they've got to provide that experience. And so that's where a lot of parking aggregators like ParkWiz and Arrive, that we announced a merger with them in January, to be able to have that consumer experience that consumers are looking for and expect, whether you're going to Target or whether you're parking to go to Target, that experience needs to be what they want. And they're going to make that choice because right now, they can choose to have somebody deliver it to them, right? So if it's painful, just bring it to me. Forget it. I won't give you the opportunity to upsell and add stuff to my cart. Retailers want that. So I think that's the piece that's really pulling consumers back is the consumer experience has got to match.
Let's use Target's example. Say in LA you had to pay to go to the Target parking lot. Are you integrating into the Target app? So if I'm in the store, it's a seamless thing. I don't have to go find a credit card or find a different app. I'm at Target. I'm using the Target app. Is it fully integrated?
One of the interesting things, I'll use our Target example. So today we're integrated with their POS system. We're not integrated with their app. But what that integration with their POS system means is there literally used to be a kiosk that was inside the door of the Target, right inside the garage. And basically you could put your ticket in it and it would print something, a validation on your ticket. And then you could go out and you could get free 2 hours of parking. Well, that actually didn't make sure that you bought something from Target. And so now that those codes for the free parking are printed on your receipt at Target, whether it's a digital receipt or not. So those codes are then based on a tiered structure based on how much you spend. So if you spent $10, you get 15 minutes of free parking. If you spent $300, you get 3 hours of free parking. They can now customize that because again, it's all in the cloud, it's all real time, and it's all going to transition between all the backend systems on our platform.
A retailer or developer would be absolutely crazy not to go with a service like yours because you changed the game.
I had a lot of those conversations. So my previous role was with Tesla and Solar City, helping build out the supercharger network, helping build out home charging, all of that aspects of what we needed to do for Model 3. And at the time, superchargers were free, right? So Target kind of said, hey, great, put these in our parking lot. That's the consumer we want. And theoretically, they'll come in. Well, I am at a lot of superchargers when I travel, and everyone's just sitting in their driver's seat doing this. I don't know how much they're actually going in. So now take that to another level. How do I not only give away free parking, but how do I bundle a parking and charging experience and link that to my POS system? Those are the systems that we're now integrating. This is now something where, most employers don't give away free gas to everybody, but a lot of them have been giving away free charging. As we get to the scale that's about to come, that's not going to happen anymore. So you've got to have a way to now tie all this together, to tie the revenue together, whether you're discounting that or not. You got to have something that links it so that you can make smart business decisions. And that's what we've built. And that's really the system that Flash had even before I got here. We're looking and finding all these new ways to connect the dots within a consumer journey.
Are your customers looking to take the EV charging, put it to a dollar amount that you're going to spend in the store for charging, and not just Tesla superchargers, but have like a charge point or an EV box where if they have a plug-in hybrid or they have a Chevy Volt, they can still charge there, but either you got to pay or you have to go in the store and buy something? Are you kind of seeing where enough of this freeloading?
Well, especially in the urban core. So when you look at a charge point or an EV Go, essentially as they're building out their network, they're focusing on those places where it's convenient and it's free to essentially park. So a lot of Whole Foods, a lot of malls where I'm driving the overall experience and I want it to be integrated. That's all going to continue. It's going to make those experiences better and full support of that. When you talk about a high rise in a downtown environment, it's a completely different thing because that charger can actually be worth a heck of a lot more during the Miami Heat game, supply and demand. We now are in the most dense, most valuable, highest dollar per square foot revenue. But what's interesting is it's completely variable. That same garage, Saturday at 4 o'clock, that charger is available. And honestly, you just drive in utilization through it, you price it a different way. ChargePoint and EVgo's model is essentially it's always the price. And that's not what these owners are looking for. So whether they're trying to tie it into a specific behavior or they're trying to benchmark it versus an occupancy thing where essentially you use the power of supply and demand, they're looking how do you integrate that component as a second revenue diversification angle for these assets. So that's really what we talk about when we say we're making the transition from a parking asset into a mobility hub. Now you're going beyond parking and it's tied together. It's not an amenity, it's not a free thing like where ChargePoint and EVgo have kind of gone in the past, but it's also all the time you're repricing it in terms of what's going on. That's what my customers are really diving for. And that represents, there's about 1 billion parking spaces in the United States. About 7% of them actually charge for that parking experience. That 7% is the ones in the urban core. Those are my customers. They're the ones that are really trying to drive this and figure out, how do I squeeze every single dime out of this because of the variability and the high value of their parking spaces.
Did the supply and demand economics drive you to cutting the partnership with EVbox because they have that open architecture platform?
It really was the open architecture. So when we met, and I was already familiar with most of them, but I'm pretty sure I met with every single charging hardware company that was at least on the market at the time. They're coming out of the woodwork now, right? But we did, and that was the piece where EVbox really saw the opportunity to separate hardware from software. Because I'm running a software platform on a kiosk that's controlling the gate, a dozen feet from the kiosk that is controlling the charging. At the end of the day, I need a lot more data. I need a lot more synchronization of that data, communication between those platforms than anybody else does. And that's really the reason EVbox split Everon off is they said, look, the software is going to be massively customized to whatever the solution is. And that's not what ChargePoint and EVgo do. They're walled garden and their world is their world. That doesn't work here because I need to be able to charge the EV consumption back to a tenant account that has X number of parking spaces associated with their office lease upstairs. And so they may want to give away free EV charging to their lawyers because they only have 5 of them and they all have EVs and they're all partners. Great, I can enable that and I just charge it back to their corporate account. Or they can say, I want to give free parking, but I don't want to give free EV charging. Okay, now I've got to create an individual consumer relationship with that parker to be able to charge for just a component and route a different component of the bill over here. So all of that is the way we're set up. So again, it's all about the configuration of what are you trying to accomplish? How are you trying to differentiate either your amenity or your product?
Because on an earlier podcast, we had Christoph, the CEO of EVbox, and he broke down their open architecture for us. It was absolutely fascinating the way that he's looking at this. He's looking at completely different than anybody else. And you and the team over at Flash Parking are looking at everything completely different. So I'm really excited to see how, as your company matures, EVbox expands in America, the really cool, innovative things that you're going to do, they're going to have a positive impact for your customers with a clear understanding of market economics with supply and demand.
Yeah.
And I want to stay on this theme of the future. So you're already ahead of the group. You're ahead of the pack. You're doing really cool things. You don't own the assets. Great, brilliant move. How are you actively preparing for a future with autonomous vehicles?
So one of the most interesting things, so kind of pre-Tesla and Solar City, I spent 7 years with Coca-Cola and 2 years running Home Depot stores before that. And so to me, when I look at these environments, I look at them like a retail store. Every single square foot needs to be merchandised. These are now choices that we need to make. And so when we do a site survey, that site survey used to be really isolated to the threshold itself. I need to cut a loop in the ground. I need to run some electricity to my kiosk. I need to make sure I have a data connection. Now our site survey is the entire thing because I need to understand where the traffic flow is. I need to understand where your elevator patterns are because now I need to hang signage that communicates, hey, by the way, on your way out, grab a scooter for $20 a day and you can software lock it wherever you want. It's yours for the entire day. Go for it. Or I need to communicate, hey, by the way, you could actually tap to pay with your phone on this sign while you're waiting at the elevator bank or in the lobby. And so I need to really understand the dynamics of the humans in this thing. And I need to understand all of it. So a lot of that now is fairly easy with LiDAR mapping built into the next iPhones. And we're really now looking at your electricity infrastructure. We're taking pictures of your box. How much service upgrade do you need for us to be able to put in 4 chargers, 8 chargers? What about the 10%? What would that look like? We need to get all of that information in one moment so that we can kind of plot the digital transformation of this asset. And if somebody wants to do it all at one point, great, we can do that. If they want to kind of chunk it out and see where the recovery is and where the investment is, great, we can do that too. But at the end of the day, I have to understand where every curve is, how many levels there are, the width of the spaces. We power the Porsche parking app, and Porsche only wanted to put parking spaces that were of a certain width to make sure that Porsche drivers didn't get dings. Awesome. I can do that. No one else has any clue what that is because they never surveyed it before. And so those are all the pieces of data that are going to be important for a vehicle that's going to communicate and route itself to the right spot and make sure that all of that is happening. That vehicle is also going to need to say, I parked in an EV charging spot and now I need one of your valet guys to run over and plug me in because there's not a human in my vehicle. All of these things are the communication and the labor management that has to happen within a mobility hub to enable that autonomous future.
I love the concept of wide parking spots. I'm the weird guy that parks a million miles away from everybody. My father-in-law does it. My wife, I'm getting her to do it as well. But it reminds me, there's this funny episode of Seinfeld where Kramer developed luxury lanes on the parkway, and because they're so wise, like, oh, you could just bounce around, and we all know that didn't work. But it's fascinating because everybody's afraid of a ding, and I used to have a Porsche before I got this current car. Same thing. Did Porsche come to you and say, okay, we need to have an extra 12 inches on each side, and then you completely redesign the paint on the garage to say, okay, this is Porsche's garage, this is the way it is, this is based on our customers, and how did that work?
So essentially, when I think about how we look at this evolution, it's people who need parking and people who have parking. And my job in the middle is connecting the dots. So Porsche kind of came to us, and by the way, we're working with, I think, 13 of the 16 automakers already. And automakers take a long time to do stuff. So not all of that's commercialized, but all of it's in process. And some of that is payment through the infotainment center. Some of that is in EV charging integration. Some of that is wider spaces. Some of that is we need the ability to send service techs and be able to get those service techs in a garage and have a consumer know to park in a certain space. So all of that can start on either side, really. So an asset owner might say, here's what's unique about my garage, and we can figure out, will people pay more for that? We can list it as a feature. Do people filter by that in the ParkWiz app? Certainly, we saw oversized spaces and oversized heights as things people were already filtering for. Now, certainly an oversized height isn't something that a asset owner is going to be able to go make a change on. But naturally, when we do that site survey, we can identify some of those opportunities. If you're in the Northeast and you're not charging for over height vehicles because you can, and everybody does, you're just leaving money on the table. And so a lot of this, just like retail, where I could re-merchandise an end cap in a Home Depot, we can add things, test them, see if somebody's going to pay for them, see who that person is, and understand how to have that conversation. So Porsche said, we want wider spaces. How do we make that happen? We went to different asset owners that we knew essentially had the ability to do it or already had it and said, hey, we want to add this in. A lot of times that ends up with the ability for us to replace all the equipment and make this a flash parking node on the network, because our proposition isn't, hey, we can make your gate go up and down faster, or we're based in the cloud and it's a better experience. We say, would you like more Porsches to park in your lot? Yes. Great. Let us show you how you can do that. But that involves jumping into the ecosystem. And you've either got to then have an addition to your existing equipment that enables us to communicate with it and control the gate, or you've got to replace that equipment. And all of those conversations kind of come from, hey, would you like some more demand? Yes. Great. We can bring it to you.
If you look at the future of autonomy, and we have an autonomous vehicle, it goes into one of your customers' garages, it needs to be cleaned. Somebody could have puked, or it just needs to be charged. So you could basically redesign that garage just using paint, essentially, and saying, okay, this area in the garage is going to be Acme Autonomy's area, and the vehicles will be programmed to go in there. You're saving a lot of costs because they can just lease it from you. Say, okay, Flash, we like to lease X amount of spots from your customer. How many dense urban environments are you currently operating in? Is it a lot of the major metropolitans? We talked about Detroit.
Right. So we're nationwide. We're in Canada as well, in Toronto, and getting ready to do our first installs in Ontario. And today we're pretty much in all top 50 major metros in the United States. Some of that takes different forms. In New York, the parking is just really weird because it's garages, but it's actually a valet. So there, you can't park your own car in New York anywhere. You actually have to hand over the keys once you pull in the garage. That's a completely different operation. So that's a different version of our software. So a lot of times it's very customized to the geography, but today we have those footprints anywhere. And some we've prioritized. Detroit was one that, as we started to really need to have better conversations with automakers, I think this was pretty early in our company's history, but so this story predates me, but it's one we use in a lot of things right now. Our founder and CEO at the time had gone and met with Ford because of some great connections, and Ford starts spinning up a team and adding more people to successive meetings. And then, someone at Ford finally said, "How many locations do you guys have?" And we were like, and kind of said, "Well, you guys need a little bit more scale." This was many years ago. We said, "Great. Where do you want that scale?" They said, "Well, Detroit." Great. Within 3 months, with Olympia, that controls about 30% of the parking in downtown Detroit and their entertainment venues, and Bedrock, which is Dan Gilbert's Rocket Mortgage kind of empire, they control about 30% of the inventory in a different part of downtown in the business district. So, with two enterprise deals converting about 60 garages between the two of them, suddenly we had 65% of parking in Detroit. Then you add Wayne State University, and that's now over 80. So we can kind of point anywhere. I won't say we have that level in all 50 metros, but through a lot of our relationships and with those big four parking operators I mentioned earlier, we can kind of point somewhere. And if we can monetize the result once we get installed, then we'll adjust pricing in the right way to be able to turn that inventory very quickly. Again, that's kind of where that, "Hey, would you like Porsche drivers?" conversation comes in.
A lot of asset owners like Porsche drivers because they
Right.
typically tend to spend more money. Another thing Flash has, which I've noticed, you have really great relationships with cities and counties, as
Mhm.
well as the operators. And one of those, you have a partnership with the city of Las Vegas where you're allowing Uber drivers to park in a staging area or waiting for a ride.
Yeah.
Really smart. Me being me, looking to the future, are you looking as to model potential behavior of autonomous vehicles since they are going to go eventually into a staging area where that can be converted?
That's essentially it. I mean, I think the problem that we were solving, so where that started is with a very, very forward looking head of parking. And interestingly, in the city of Las Vegas, parking reports into their economic development organization in the municipality. And so her job is, how do you use parking to drive economic development? And one of the things she saw in Old Vegas, where you've got the Fremont Street experience that's kind of in between the casinos, but there's kind of a figure eight structure of roads. So there's kind of a road on the top, a road on the bottom, and a road in the middle. The challenge was you had Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, won't call out anybody specific, but you had rideshare drivers that at the end of the day don't reduce traffic congestion, right? That you add rideshare, it increases miles driven by 50% because they've got to get to you. So there's now extra miles being driven from that model. What she was finding was she couldn't get people that were trying to come to downtown Las Vegas in because you had Uber drivers that were essentially just driving in a circle waiting on a fare, or they were pulling into a space and putting their blinkers on that was blocking everything else. And so Brandy had a problem to solve. She's literally like, "I have to get these vehicles out of downtown when they don't have a passenger in them. And I'm fine putting them right outside of that perimeter so they have a straight shot. They're right there." She also, by the way, controls where the taxis do that already. And she'd already moved that out. And so essentially working with Uber, she replicated what happens at most airports in the entire downtown. So you now can't actually be eligible for that next ride unless you're within the geofences of the municipal garages. So she's actually forcing them into the staging area, which is her own garage, and off of those to get the fare to then go drive the pickup. And she's coordinating with the hotels and casinos to create their pull throughs, where again, she's promising them that they won't just sit there, that these are only people that are coming in with direction to pick someone up. The entire thing flows so much better. And she didn't have to add human enforcement, and she didn't have to add tickets and pain. Uber was like, "Great, this is awesome. Hey, do you have EV chargers in there? Because we'd really love to have our people charge too, so we can drive that EV conversion." "Yes, we do." "Great, let's add those and let's get some reporting and really understand that data for her to be able to go forward. And all of these garages, by the way, are all attached to the Justice Center. So they're crazy busy 8 to 5. By 5:30, they're completely empty. So all that opens up perfectly then for the Uber drivers. So in no way did she lose anything by doing this. She actually increased the utilization of her asset while solving a municipal problem. The same thing is now happening with scooters. And as we're looking at putting scooters on dedicated racks in garages in the urban environment, versus 10 feet away on the sidewalk where people trip over them. Guess what benefits? The city. The city now can integrate all these things. They don't have to try to continually play the shell game and pass a rule to try to get Bird and Lime to do something as they figure out how to solve it. Now they're actually looking at, okay, how do we do this? How do we not then have the gig economy worker drive in from out of town, pick them up, drive all the way back, then drive all the way back in the morning after they're charged and drop them off again? All of those, that happens right there. So at the end of the day, that's the kind of dynamics with the municipalities, as well as a lot of times they own the transit kind of systems that include their actual garages they own and operate themselves. And so again, they become a customer, but then by being a customer and linking to their broader ecosystem they control, a lot of times their own transit app that can pair together park and ride all the way through into downtown, that's all now integrated as well. So that's the municipal angle. And it is a tremendous lift when they can start to use these, coming from Tesla and my background, we've been talking a lot about EV. When you look at an urban garage, it's a big battery, right? At the end of the day, we can fill it with cars, we can get out of them, but that's the system that we kind of see, and we can orchestrate that symphony now.
It's the mobility hub strategy at the end of the day. I mean, that's really what you're orchestrating. And for the scooter charging, you have a relationship with Colin Roche's Swift Mile, and he's solving the clutter problem. How did that relationship evolve?
So when I left Solar City and Tesla, and I'd had a lot of folks that I'd worked with really hard that were now at Bird and Amazon and Uber and all these other places. And as I was talking about what I'm doing, because I had a lot of friends that called and were like, okay, I know you're not just getting into parking. Like, what are you doing? Help us understand this. And as I talked about it a little bit, even in the way we talked about it now, they're like, oh, well, here's my problem. Can you help me solve that? So that's where this started with Bird. And one of my good friends that joined product at Bird and kind of brought this to life and said, what is the program that works here? What's the economics? What's the labor model? How does all this kind of work and utilize potentially a valet runner, potentially this labor that's already there, this electricity that's already there? And when we took the pilot program out, we actually didn't have Swift Mile as part of it. And the first conversation with the operator was, well, you can't just move that mess from the sidewalk into my parking structure, because if these are in parking spaces that people pull into and they run over them, this is going to be a disaster. I was like, oh, great point. And by the way, we needed a way to charge them. And the original charger for Bird was like the one that the scooter wranglers have in the house. So it's a plug with a bunch of strings. And they're like, that doesn't work for us either. Like, there is no back room where we're going to store these things. This is it. It's kind of like Home Depot. It's a warehouse. Like, there is no warehouse behind it. This is the warehouse. And so that's really where we said we need a rack solution for organization. And can we integrate the charging into that so it becomes so much easier? And again, starting to have those conversations. So as we run through that user journey with Bird, they're like, oh, well, if we actually have that connection with Swift Mile, we can look for that and actually make that requirement to be there before they can end their ride. So the user actually has to plug it in to end their ride to be able to walk away. Well, now again, we've got the right folks doing the right jobs in the most convenient and most efficient way. And so Swift Mile enabled all of that because they're connected. We can now see that charger on the Bird scooter side. We can see the charge on the Swift Mile side. We have redundancy so that when you exit, however fast it is or however far ground you are, all of that's going to come together into that single transaction. That's really the revenue control promise. Because this is their cash register. At the end of the day, we run the cash register. It's got to be up 99.99999, right?
The thing is, if you're not a business and you're not profitable, you shouldn't be in business.
Right, exactly.
At the end of the day, it's about generating revenue, return for your shareholders, doing good by your employees. This nonsense of will we achieve profitability in 20 years, that's going to blow up at some point when the SPAC attack comes crashing. And then here comes Flash. Oh, what do you do? Oh, we make profits. Oh, what do you do? We generate revenue. Whoa, this is a little odd out here.
Yeah, it's an interesting business and one that parking always has been a bit of a cash cow industry. So there's a lot of hands in this cookie jar. And when you look at the direct model that we use, the way we have direct relationships, we're putting that money all back on the table of the core players that are actually creating that value. And that legacy kind of industry structure is going to fade away, and make sure that we have the asset operators and the parking operators and us driving every single piece of it so that we can make sure it's all coordinated.
As Flash implements the mobility hub strategy, Do we see consolidation in parking garages, or do we see an expansion? Where do you see that going?
In terms of the number of parking garages, is that what you mean?
Yes, in dense urban environments.
Yeah, I don't see it, because I think if you go back to the comment I made earlier of rideshare actually increases miles driven, increases vehicles on the road, and especially in an EV world, they're going to need to charge somewhere. You can kind of see a world where maybe they drive back home and then they come back, but in an EV world, that battery power is super valuable. So they're going to want to stay there, and there's just not enough parking spaces. And we'll see whether people end up working from home 2 days a week on average for an office worker post COVID, or if it's more or less. But at the end of the day, those parking spaces are going to need to be used in a more dynamic fashion to just handle the number of cars that we're about to see. I mean, most of my friends in New York have bought their COVID car, and they don't know when they're going to sell it, right? They bought some used car because now they don't want to take public transportation. Maybe they're back on public transportation a year from now. Maybe they're back in an Uber 8 months from now. But that's not what the next 6 months are going to be. So I think we're going to see an actual increase in value opportunity for these. And with our monitoring, it isn't just one car for one space for one day. We can see the minute that leaves, free up that inventory, put it back on the market, price it the right way so that it doesn't stay empty for very long. And that's really what's going to solve that urban congestion problem. Otherwise, our streets are just going to be a gigantic parking lot.
You're right about vehicles mile traveled are going through the roof. You're right about individuals such as your friends in New York buying their COVID car. Once the cat's out of the bag, I don't see people going back to public transportation. I mean, at some point, yes, you will go to share, but perhaps if you're going out for dinner and drinks, you're going to use an Uber and a Lyft. But if you're going to the grocery store, you're going to visit a friend, you want to go in your own vehicle because you have, like, oh, wow, this is freedom. I remember that. I'm turning 16. I get my driver's license. I have my freedom.
Absolutely.
People are experiencing that moment again. And this is a funny term. I said, well, the vehicles need somewhere to go to sleep when you're not using them. Right. And they're going to go to one of your parking garages to go take a nap when you go into that. And we all know, and you've clearly laid out during this conversation, parking is going to play a huge role in the future mobility. Without parking, we're going to have parking lots in cities. And as cities take policies to reduce the amount of roadways, well, the vehicles are going to have to go into the parking garages. Yeah. It's going to be really, really interesting if on-street parking goes away. Well, then it's going into a garage, which benefits your business. And so I think that flash parking, in my opinion, is in a really great position. You're going to help usher in the future mobility, from shared mobility to autonomous mobility, and to the individual that just loves to drive. You're there to help them. So, Neil, as we look to wrap up this extremely insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
I think the biggest thing is look for the opportunities to find the places that meet your expectations as everyone gets back to the post times, whatever terminologies we're going to use for that. But I think expect better. I think that's the biggest thing, because the right facilities are ready. And that differentiation and voting with your dollars and your drives and putting your vehicles in these places that do give you that extra space in your parking space, if that's important to you, a closer proximity, if that's important to you, a scooter, if that's important to you, look for those opportunities, and don't just expect the downtown experience to be what it was pre-COVID, because we've grown tremendously over the last year. I think our conversations have fundamentally changed in terms of, I definitely got pre-COVID. Yeah, you guys are the flying car guys. Yeah, whatever. And now it's very much oh, you guys have touchless solutions. Please get that in my garage, because my asset owner is starting to come back to work, and they've asked me about that and EV charging 5 times. And so I think the more that consumers express that to the actual folks that make these decisions and demand it, and certainly, Facebook, Google, and Amazon and their leases are demanding it already, and making sure that individual consumer knows it's available and just express it. I think that's where the great experiences are ahead of us. And I would say, get out, go downtown, after you get your vaccines, get out, go downtown, go to a restaurant, valet your vehicle. If you have an electric vehicle, when you do valet, say, hey, can you guys charge my car while you're out? Most of them will say no. But right now, we're starting to see more and more traction with that. More and more phone calls of, we probably should have a extra $20 that we charge to put you on the EV charger for 10 minutes on a DC fast, and we rotate you on and off. And those kinds of adoption and those kinds of behaviors are going to give everybody confidence to make the infrastructure investments as we go forward. So demand more. I think that's the summary.
As we've heard during this podcast, Neil said it brilliantly. It's all about the customer experience at the end of the day. And so, Neil, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy, because the future is bright, the future is autonomous, and the future is mobility hubs. Neil, thank you again so much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.